RPN, the Roddenberry Podcast Network.
This episode of Mission Log is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Cut your wireless bill to as little as $15 a month at mintmobile.com/missionlog.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 350, Accession.
Welcome to another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Norman Lau. Each week on Mission Log, we explore the morals, meanings, and messages, and even the deep probing questions of belief presented in at least a few episodes of Star Trek.
This week, Accession, the one where the Emissary meets the Emissary, and then they have an Emissary off? Is that how you settle it? Or maybe a dance-off, or you just ask Mom and Dad to settle it once and for all? We'll find out.
What are you doing? Emissary off, bro. Emissary off.
That's the way it happens. I'm certain. Yeah.
The throwdown, like two DJs. Or Dajaras, if you will.
Oh, nice.
Snap. But before we jump into the serious questions of Bajoran theology, let's tell you how to get in touch with us. If you'd like to chat with us, please contact us at these subspace frequencies. Mission Log Pod is where you can find us on Facebook, Skype, and Twitter. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, call us at 323-522-5641. Our email address is missionlog@roddenberry.com, and our show website, including discovered documents, is at missionlogpodcast.com. And remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. But before we get into testing one's faith, what is never tested about my faith is the quality of trivia that will now be brought to you by one Mr. John Champion.
Why, thank you, Norman. This week, trivia on Accession. The episode was written by Jane Espenson. Wow. Jane Espenson is a name that should be known to science fiction fans in general, not just Trek fans. She did actually pitch to the writers of TNG way back in the day, and at least a portion of her pitch was bought for Force of Nature. But she didn't get a credit on that one. Jane is best known for her association with Joss Whedon, having worked as a writer or producer on Buffy, Angel, Firefly, Dollhouse, and then she is definitely known for being a big part of Ronald D. Moore's Battlestar Galactica. Accession was directed by Les Landau. Now, we definitely remember Les as a longtime Trek director from way back on TNG as well. He was first assistant director and then stepped up to finish Code of Honor when the original director was not able to finish it. Les went on to do 33 more episodes of TNG, and here we are coming into the home stretch of his tenure on DS9. We most recently talked about his work when we covered Crossfire, just very recently, and he's got 4 more episodes to go before we catch up with him again on Voyager. Now, there's a nice reuse of the light sail ship model that we had in Explorers here in this episode as the vehicle that brings Aquarum out of the wormhole. That model was, of course, built in CG by Industrial Light and Magic from a design by Jim Martin. And let's talk about guest stars. Well, we welcome back Rosalind Chow as Keiko and Hannah Hate as Molly O'Brien. And I know we've seen them before, but my oh my, it does seem like a long time. So here they are again. We also get to welcome back Camille Saviola as Kai Opaka. Well, at least as the image of Kai Opaka. We assume the real Opaka is still doing her thing on that planet somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant. And we meet Vedic Porta, here played by Robert Simons. Now, like a lot of actors on DS9, Robert had a strong background in live theater in both LA and the Bay Area. His on-screen credits go back to the mid-50s, though, and he really kicked into high gear by the early 70s. The usual roundup of TV guest roles led to films. He appeared in the horror classic The Exorcist and in Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that he appears in the very first regular episode of The Love Boat from 1977 as Aubrey Skogstad. You can hear all about it in Lido Deck, a Love Boat podcast. Finally, The man who would be Emissary is Accession Lan, played by Richard Libertini. Richard is a very recognizable actor. This might be his only Trek appearance, but he's one of those actors who just sort of turns up everywhere for feature films. He was in Fletch and Fletch Lives, as well as the classic 1979 comedy The In-Laws, to TV shows as a guest and a voice actor in animation. Interestingly, though, this role was first offered and really championed for by Ira Stephen Bear, first offered to Trek veteran guest star David Warner. He was on vacation, though, and his wife discouraged him from taking the role, so he had to turn it down.
If you want my advice, don't spend your downtime taking a trip in a Bajoran lightship. Something interesting always seems to happen, if you get my drift.
Prologue. It's visitor day at DS9. First, there's Keiko and Molly returning to the station after being away for a year on Bajor. Oh, and Keiko has a little surprise for Miles. She's pregnant. Yeah. It's been a year. Well, to be accurate, she did visit a couple of months ago, and, well, they must have timed things very right that one time. Miles is pleased? Sure, I'm surprised, yes, and maybe a little unsure how to process the news. In Ops, another visitor, Vedic Porta, who is escorting a young, newly married Bajoran couple who really want a blessing from the Emissary. Sisko, maybe just the slightest bit uneasy, but still very respectful, does his thing, speaking the Bajoran ritual very nicely. Finally, another visitor, a lightship a couple of centuries old, just emerges from the wormhole, and there's someone on board. When that someone is beamed to the infirmary, he introduces himself as the Emissary. Act 1. And a freak mishap. The Bajoran light sail ship and its pilot, Accession Lan, were blown out of their trajectory and returned him 200 years later. Well, that's the story anyway. Accession was swallowed up by the wormhole, badly hurt, and he met the prophets who healed him and sent him back. It was only a few days for him, but here he is, a man now in the wrong time. He doesn't understand completely, but he does know that he's the emissary, or else why would the prophets have sent him back? Kira knows his name, Accession Lan. He's a very famous Bajoran poet, known for such works as the unfinished The Call of the Prophets, and she's super impressed to meet him. She can help him get acclimated to everything that he's missed. Oh, like a little thing called the Cardassian occupation, and how that upended Bajoran society. Accession is shocked to hear it, and even more so that it meant the Bajorans abandoned their system of Dajaras, which is a sort of caste system assigning Bajorans to occupational roles based on their names. Benjamin Sisko is relieved. Here's a Bajoran, a famous one at that, who was the first to meet the prophets, a.k.a. wormhole aliens. They saved his life, which is part of the Bajoran scriptures, so maybe that is the right guy after all. Woohoo! No more blessings and Bajoran language lessons. Once word has spread about the O'Briens having another baby, well, everybody's happy, and Miles's best friend, Dr. Bashir, welcomes him into Quark's for a celebratory drink. It's cut short, though. O'Brien wants to stay for a while and have a drink, even a game of darts, but the obligation calls. He needs to get back home to Keiko and Molly. Later on the promenade, Accession makes his first speech as emissary, and he wastes no time at all getting right to the point. Bajorans have lost their way, and he's pretty sure his time with the prophets meant that he was to send a message that Bajorans must return to their Dajaras. Only then will they truly regain their peace. Act 2. Later, Sisko pushes back, very gently. Are Accession and Vedic Porta and others really ready to make such a big change on Bajor? Will the people really accept it? Are they sure this is what the prophets want? And what about the Federation? They won't admit a culture that still uses a caste system. No problem, Accession assures him. Kai Wynn is totally on board with this, even if it means dropping their petition to join the Federation. As for people who don't buy into their Dejara, easy enough. They can be dealt with or deported. Bye. So all of this should be off to a great start. Even Kira, who is so motivated by her faith, seemed to buy into it, even if it means she would follow a career path of art rather than being a major. The next morning, though, she gets a taste of how this will start to go down. A Bajoran woman in the Replomat immediately defers to her, giving up her seat, indicating that her own caste is lower and Kira deserves the seat. Sisko says that kind of thing has been going on all morning. And all of this is making Sisko lose sleep. Literally, the captain is tossing and turning at night, and his dream/nightmare leads to a vision of Kaiopaka. Oh, hey, Kaiopaka! Asking pointedly, who are you? Who? Act 3. Sisko checks out just fine in the infirmary. Bashir says it could actually be an orb shadow, kind of a side effect of being exposed to one of the orbs. Nothing a neuropeptide suppressor can't handle, though. Also restless is Kira, who's trying to follow what her Dejara demands, that she become an artist. She's not good. Her sculptures are, what's the Bajoran word for it? Terrible. Vedic Porta just tells Kira that she hasn't really given herself over to her Dejara yet. I mean, she is still wearing her military uniform. It will come. She'll be so happy, he promises. Speaking of happy, there's Miles at home with Keiko and Molly. It seems the picture of familial bliss with Keiko doing a little work and then Miles trying to engage with his daughter, who'd rather color on her own. Miles is really left out. More disappointments follow. Sisko informs Kira that Starfleet is not happy with what's happening on Bajor, and then another blow. Kira tells Sisko that she's going to resign as soon as he has a replacement. She'll go live in an area of Bajor with other artists. It's something she has to do, even though it seems she's emotionally compromised at the prospect. Sisko says he knows they can find someone to fill her post, but never to replace her. Act 4, time again for Bashir and O'Brien to not really hang out like they did before. They're having a quick drink at Quark's, but there's no holosuite adventure, no darts tournament. In fact, Quark has her holosuite reserved at the moment, but O'Brien can't since he has to go home, and Bashir just doesn't feel up to it. They part ways, leaving Quark with a paid but unused holosuite. There's someone else not feeling up to it at the moment. He's some poor Bajoran chap who had the bad fortune of falling to his death from the second level of the promenade. Well, falling is not exactly the word. He was pushed off by Vedic Porta, since that man was from an unclean caste and refused to leave their order. It is, after all, what the prophets would have wanted. Akorum tells Sisko this is unfortunate, that there will be growing pains as Bajorans get used to their new system. But he is fulfilling the will of the prophets, and he is the emissary now. So there. Sisko says he has no choice now other than to challenge Akorum's claim to be emissary, and the only way to settle this is by asking the prophets themselves. Act 5. Off to the wormhole we go. Sisko pilots himself and Akorum in a shuttle, and right on cue the wormhole aliens pick them up, manifesting themselves as Kira, Bashir, Odo, Vedic Porta, and others. Akorum wastes no time in saying that he needs them to confirm that he is, in fact, the emissary, since he found them first. This word first and others like later don't really ring any bells for the non-linear aliens. They do that on one thing that makes sense, though. They returned Akorum to the place and time they did for Sisko. So yeah, Sisko is the emissary in his time, but they can send Akorum back to his own time to safely live out his life on Bajor. And in a flash, he's gone. But Sisko is still there, and the avatars around him have changed. It's Kaiopaka, and she repeats what the others have said before. We are of Bajor. When Sisko inquires further, she says, you are of Bajor. Then he finds himself back in his runabout on his way to DS9. In the O'Brien home, Miles is maybe a little restless, a little depressed. Keiko says to him that she saw Julian the other day and he seemed a little out of sorts. Maybe it would do him some good for Miles to go visit him for an hour or two. That's all the encouragement he needs as he heads out the door. Then Keiko calls Bashir. You know, Miles has seemed in a funk lately. Maybe you should hang out with him sometime, like tonight. In Quark's bar, Kira presents Sisko with one of her terrible, terrible sculptures. In the time since he got back, he gave a speech as Emissary, explaining what happened to Akorum and that the prophets said nothing about returning to Djaraz. One interesting little tidbit, though, Akorum never finished his famous poem, The Call of the Prophets. Only now he did. With his return to Bajor, the poem that Kira remembers having stopped after the 12th stanza now has a proper ending. But why would she know that if history had been altered? The prophets work in mysterious ways, as all the explanations Sisko can muster up. Then a Bajoran man and his daughter, who is turning 14, approach Sisko and ask if he can offer up his blessing tomorrow, and he gladly obliges. The end.
All the faith that is fit to print. Well done, Mr. Champion.
Thank you.
I really, really, really love where we're going to be able to take this discussion. But first of all,
yes,
let's talk about the bachelor's life.
The bachelor pad, yes.
The bachelor pad. Because in the year-long or month-long or 2 months long, we're not really sure, right?
We're not at all. They mentioned it before. That, you know, the last time we saw Keiko, Miles said something about how, I've turned the bedroom into a workshop.
Yeah.
First of all, their quarters are huge. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a massive place on board DS9. And DS9 has a lot of space anyway, but he really went overboard.
There was something that I mentioned in the previous episode about why do these guys keep wearing these uniforms and who has time to change into all these different outfits for their... Well, there here is where they're storing all of their stuff.
Yes.
Right? All their bachelor stuff. And it's, you know, Bashir is a little bit of an enabler. You know, he's a bachelor, so he's a little bit of an enabler. I get it. I've, you know, anyone who's been in really, really, really long-term relationships know that it's hard to make that adjustment. It's hard to kind of like relegate your life from something that is so macro into something micro. Yeah.
Right. Although, you know, I expect better out of the 24th century. Like, we have amazing technology today where you can put your unused pillows and shirts and things in a bag and suck all the air out, and then, look, it doesn't take up as much room. That all would fit nicely stacked in a cargo bay on DS9. You could just, like, get rid of all of that stuff and not have to worry about it. Or just have the replicator suck it back up inside the replicator circuitry. Next time you need it, say, hey, give me a pillow or give me a, sheepskin cloak that I can wear when I'm fighting for the King of Ireland.
I'm shocked, John. I'm shocked that DVD Geeks himself is talking about not being able to treasure and to collect physical collection media.
No, but I want all of that stuff behind a nice, smooth cabinet built into the wall where it could just be there, and then I can open it up and behold the glory, and then put it away.
Oh,
that's
okay.
the dream.
Perfect.
That's the dream. Right. What else? See, I really like the callback to the sail ship. That was obviously Star Trek reuses models and reuses effects elements, but this was a really cool way to do that. Where from essentially a standalone episode, hey, we're going to build this ancient piece of technology and see if it works. It's like I talked about in the episode, Thor Heyerdahl doing the Kon-Tiki expedition, but then it's like 200 years later, that raft shows up again. I thought it was a nice little way to do that.
Yeah, I really liked it. It brings a continuity to the series, and it's not the only throwback that we're going to discuss because there have been other throwbacks in this episode which are really, really super funny, one of which in particular. But yeah, it was nice to see that model, that the lightship model. And obviously it kind of it paints a very quick picture of how old and how ancient and maybe how important the person is on this ship really is coming through the wormhole.
Yeah. It was a nice detail. Now, I know that, of course, there are much deeper issues to deal with when we get into the next segment, but it's funny how Sisko says that Starfleet never liked the idea that Bajoran saw him as a religious figure, and yet, by the time we get to the end of this, it's sort of like, I wonder what the rest of the conversation at Starfleet was like. Like, oh, they got rid of the other guy, and there's going to be stability there now? Sure, just let him continue to be Emissary. Just, it suits us now. It feeds into what we need to happen. So, yeah, just let him stay there.
Yeah, the politics behind that must have been so interesting to hear if you were a fly on the wall.
Yes, yeah.
But what I liked about that particular scene when he was doing the blasting is that he never left gripping his ball. His baseball. It was like, okay, it's my baseball.
Yes,
I'm good with my baseball in my hand. Anytime I need to make something, a serious decision, I have this in my hand. Yeah, like Linus and his blanket.
Yeah, it grounds him. It's nice. It's a nice little character detail. Oh, and I love see Brock acquire Brock acquire. So first of all, look, I love the Dick and Jane reference turned into Ferengi. I mean, that's just classic. That is wonderful. And I also wonder, they had to have been aware that they were kind of sort of making a Space Ghost reference as well. They have to have been.
Yes.
Yeah. So funny. And let's talk about another great comedic moment. Worf's reaction to Keiko's pregnancy. I mean, brilliant. Absolutely great. Michael Dorn can just deliver that straight man delivery when he needs to, and he's brilliant at it. Unfortunately, I would be away from the station at that time. And then you know it's a lie, because we know he'll never go see his parents again. That's where Alexander is. What the hell would he be doing there?
Oh, yeah. And everyone don't forget that he said that, I have no family.
Yeah, right.
From Sons of Moog.
Very convenient, Worf. Yeah.
But it is funny because it does kind of pay off what happened in the Next Generation Season 5 disaster, because it put everyone in their most uncomfortable scenario. Like, Worf literally does not want to be in the same turbo lift as somebody who is delivering a human child.
Right. Oh, it's so awesome. Hey, there was another interesting little detail there where Akorum reaches for Sisko's ear. And first of all, hey, just no ear touching without asking permission first. That seems a little invasive. I know a Ferengi might like it, but that seems a bit invasive. And it was interesting that Akorum said now he recognizes why Kai Wynn fears Sisko's pah, or fears Sisko. It was a more explicit way of describing the Kai Wynn-Sisko relationship than we've had before, because Kai Wynn just comes in full of vinegar and very antagonistic, very abrasive. But it's interesting to give it that other level to say that she is also coming from a place of fear here, which I don't doubt drives a lot of her decisions, but she turns that into her advantage over and over and over again. Also, look, okay, the wormhole aliens pull this thing about linear time each and every time. Yet they understand that they have the power to put someone back where they belong. I'm just saying, look, wormhole aliens, you've had time to learn at least how humans and Bajorans perceive time. They've been coming in and out of there. You've had a conversation. It's like, to me, it's sort of like learning a little bit of a language when you travel. Just put in a little bit of effort, okay? It'll make things run much more smoothly if you do that. All right, Norman, I have a plan. Eventually, we'll make a convention appearance together, and we'll need to pay for our time wherever we go. So, business proposition, you and I go into business making Kira art sculptures. And we sign our name to them, and we sell them for, I don't know, just tons and tons of money.
I think we will at least sell them, all of them, for at least 1 ounce of gold pressed latinum. At least.
Maybe.
At least. But, John, before we move on, I just wanted to leave the listeners with a little bit of a reaction that I had when I was watching Kira work the clay. As one does when anyone works a clay scene, you're thinking about the scene with Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze in Ghost.
Of course. Well, also with Whoopi Goldberg, Guinan herself.
Exactly. But that's a very famous scene. And I was just thinking it would have been really nice to have seen a scene with Nana as Kira working the clay. Then all of a sudden, Vedic Bareil comes in and just turns that scene into something so incredibly sensual, as one does when thinking about both Ghost and Deep Space Nine.
Major Kira seems to have faith of the heart, but is she really going where her heart will take her?
We'll get back into Accession in a moment, but first, a word from Mint Mobile.
When was the last time you gave a good look at your wireless bill? Because I have a feeling that you're paying too much. Look, it's 2020. We can do anything and everything online. I promise you. And on top of that, network coverage around the country is better than ever before, no matter who your wireless provider is. So why would you just pay more for the same exact service? Well, that's where Mint Mobile comes in. They can cut your bill down to $15 a month for the same premium coverage. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, this is too good to be true, but these guys know what they're doing. So here's what's great about Mint Mobile. You go to their website, you can keep your existing phone number. You don't have to give that up. I know that I've carried the same phone number with me for 20 plus years. You enter that into the Mint Mobile website. They send a package to your door for free. So you can choose the amount of data that suits you. You could have, well, as low as 4 gigabytes a month. You could have up to 12 gigabytes a month and beyond. And they recently added free calling for their U.S. customers in Canada and Mexico. Now, look, your old wireless bills are overpriced for a reason, because you're paying for retail stores, you're paying for overhead, you're paying for a lot of marketing. That's why Mint Mobile came along and reimagined how you buy wireless and made it all online so they could pass along those savings to you. Now, the best part of it is that if you're not 100% satisfied, Mint Mobile has you covered with their 7-day money-back guarantee.
You know, John, in this time, in this day and age, it's really responsible for people to take a look at all of their incoming and outgoing expenses. So this is something that I think people can really take advantage of, because it's something that allows them to give themselves a little bit more control over the data that they're paying for, or maybe the data that they're overpaying for. So to get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/missionlog. That's mintmobile.com/missionlog. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/missionlog.
All right, Norman, I think we might have a note or two on this episode. I mean, and I don't even know where to start in a certain respect, because there's a lot happening here. And honestly, without jumping to the end, I really appreciate how much this episode bit off to chew on and to allow us to chew on. But I'm going to start right off by saying I hate to sound like a broken record, because we've touched on this before, but every time, and maybe especially in DS9, where we encounter a storyline where faith is being used as a way to manipulate people, all the circuitry in my brain just starts to overload. I'm like one of Mudd's androids, just short circuiting, like can't handle this, can't. So that's where we are with this episode. At first, me being just absolutely infuriated and gobsmacked at what is happening with Bajorans manipulating other Bajorans through this interpretation. But then I think we end up in a very interesting and not entirely satisfying place as well. Now, I think it's awful when you see an example of using faith and revelation to direct social policies, simply because those things can't be tested, they can't be questioned. And it's awful that faith just sort of becomes this final answer that doesn't require justification, especially when it's handed out as revelation. Oh, well, I heard it from the prophets in the wormhole. You don't believe me? Well, they told me, so I must be right. And I'm really disturbed at how quickly the Bajorans buy into this whole idea. Now, I understand that it's a TV show and it's very compressed, but we're talking about a planet full of people. Even just on DS9, we're talking about a space station full of people, and people who grew up under the Cardassian occupation. So they never lived through this era of the Dajaras. It's scary to me how quickly they're ready to dismiss their lives and lifestyles and to say, oh, yeah, well, this has a faith-based answer, therefore we should take it, we should adopt it, even though it disrupts the lives that we know. Now, the irony is that at the end of this episode, how easily the Bajorans just accept Sisko's resolution to all of this. How do they know that Ikorum went back to the right time? Well, we have Kira figuring that out. We don't necessarily know that all of them do or that they would. But why should they trust Sisko? I mean, basically, this is like, okay, imagine for you and I, Shakespeare comes back from the dead, and then someone takes him away on a flight and comes back without him and says, hey, it's all good, folks. He wasn't supposed to be here anyway. We're just like, what? Huh? What? Or insert any other famous figure. I chose Shakespeare the poet, but you could say anybody.
There is so much to unravel in this episode. You're right, John. I don't really know how to start, how to respond to what you said, because a lot of what you're saying, if not everything that you're saying, are points that I agree with, in part or in total, because you and I have both had conversations about how faith is used in a way to manipulate the independent thought of the people that wholesale believe in that faith. Now, I'm not admonishing faith in any way, and I'm going to probably put a disclaimer right here, right now for what I'm going to say, because I want to intelligently discuss and debate faith-based policies, because it's something for me that has been very, very poignant in my life. Now, that's going to be discussed in later segments of the show, but I do find it surprising that Kira, let's take Kira as probably the very most lost opportunity in this episode, where she could have been the stand-in for us to challenge what was happening with these two emissaries, the emissary that was and the emissary that is. And after what she did in Starship Down and the lengths that she went to expose and bare her spiritual soul to Sisko, to keep him alive and to make that connection, to finally make that connection, of which that point was very, very well, heavily established for that episode, she just turns so quickly in this episode, just because someone else says, I'm the new emissary, and therefore you must obey my new laws.
Yeah. Well, so you make a good point here structurally as well, which is that just for people listening who may not remember right off the bat, Starship Down, pretty recent episode for us, in which the Defiant is trapped in a gas cloud trying to pull up another ship, and they've been very badly damaged, and there's Sisko dying on the bridge with, as you said, Kira bearing her soul. It's unfortunate structurally in this episode that they didn't make Kira us, because we don't have an us in this episode. We have the emissaries who are fighting it out, and I'm going to talk about the good and the bad of what Sisko did here. But we're essentially saying all of the Bajorans all the time are simply following whatever anybody says is the faith-based position. And we really need somebody who has had a variety and wealth of other experiences like Kira, or hey, you know what, if it's not going to be Kira, bring in Shakar. Bring in somebody else who can be a little bit of a voice of skepticism there. I would prefer it have been Kira, because Shakar has a vested interest in keeping his position there, because he has a political position now. But you needed somebody who could be a balance, who could be a voice of reason. But Kira surprises me, and she says something in here. She's basically paraphrasing St. Thomas Aquinas. And she says about faith, well, if you don't have it, you can't understand it. And if you do, no explanation is necessary. I am Odo in that scene. Odo is me, trying so hard to find the logic in it, to challenge the perception, to basically say, this doesn't sound like you. You know that there is another way to look at this. Why are you just simply accepting this this problem here that you've given to yourself, that they both can't be the emissary, but you're just saying, oh, I've just justified it in my head. It's part of the problem that we all have as human beings, is that we go with the feeling first, what feels right first, and then we do backward flips to try to justify ourselves into a position that we've already taken. I am Odo in the respect that I'm saying, I don't care what you believe, I just want to know if it's true or not. That's it. I just want to know the truth in what you are saying. And I hate Vedic Porta's advice to Kira when she can't hack it as a sculptor, because it really just comes down to him saying, to coin a phrase, pray harder. She's saying, I'm not good at this. This isn't what I've done. Look, she's an adult woman. She's spent her whole life of experiences doing all these other things, pouring herself into these other roles. And Porta just saying, oh, no, you're going to be happier. You just need to pray harder about it. You need to work harder at it. It's what the prophets want. Therefore, you will be happy. And I'm sorry, but it's dismissive and terrible. It puts all this weight on her and then basically sets her up for failure. It's him. It is he who says it's not our place to question the emissary as well, right? Mm-hmm. And that absolutely drives me nuts. We ended one of our shows recently, I think even offline, where I was quoting Jefferson, question boldly everything, even the existence of God. And to be given any answer that comes with it, the sort of asterisk that says, you can't question this answer, I think is absolutely terrifying. Now, if there is a silver lining to any of this that I'm describing, it's that Star Trek, in this very interesting way, has again held up a mirror of us by putting it all on this alien culture. And I think we are meant to recognize the problems that are being espoused here. But I think the bigger problem with the episode that we will land upon is that I'm not totally satisfied with the conclusion of the episode.
I think it's fair to say that maybe in that scene where Odo and Kira were having that conversation, that Odo actually is us, and that he is, the representation of the point of view of the audience. It's just that he isn't used nearly enough as that counterpoint to Kira. And the thing is that he would be the perfect person to be the counterpoint to Kira, given their relationship. But I think the one thing, John, that really bothers me about this episode is that in a matter of days, when this new emissary shows up, Kira is willing to give up everything. Everything. Yeah. From when she was a little girl to when she learned how to fight for Bajor, the independence, to fight the Cardassians, to end the occupation, and everything that she sacrificed to get to where she is today. All of those things that she did, she believed was done in service of the prophets.
Yeah.
That was her understanding of her role in life. And now, all of a sudden, this one person shows up and says, I am the true emissary, and therefore what I have decided will change all of your beliefs because the prophets will it.
Yeah. Well,
right?
Well, yeah, because it's so easy to just decide, well, I'm going to follow the person who says that this is what the prophets or the God figure, or whatever what they are doling out. And whether that person is a charlatan who doesn't believe what they're saying and just purely using it for the manipulative power that it has, or even if they truly believe it, but they can still be wrong, the problem is you don't have an objective standard to say whether they are right or they are wrong. And that's sort of where I wish, going back to that moment with Odo and Kira, that's why I wish that there had been an additional scene where Odo could have pushed that point. Because that moment of dialogue that we get really illustrates the sort of privileged place that we give faith. Where somebody says, well, that's my faith, and I just believe it, and you can't question it because it's my faith. And then Odo we almost get this shrug, like, okay, I guess I'm caught there. I guess I can't ask you any further. No. I want Odo to push further. because we're not getting that from other places in this episode.
I think one of the other scenes that really troubled me quite a bit, actually, when I saw it, was when Vedic Porta pushed the unclean caste Bajoran from the upper promenade and murdered him.
Yeah.
Because the prophets wanted him to do that in their service. The will of the prophets, as we have mentioned before. The will of the prophets. Really think about like what they are saying here. It's basically plausible deniability to any action that any Bajoran takes because the prophets say or deem it so. That in and of itself reminds me of a movie that was very powerful to me, also called, it was Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven. And it's where the Crusaders, I believe it's the Third Crusade against Jerusalem, where their mantra was, God wills it. You know, the destruction of Acre, the destruction of Jerusalem, the sacking of the city, and the occupation by the Christians was done solely because God wills it.
Yeah.
That the mantra is how those Christians justified the atrocities that they exacted upon those people, upon Salahuddin and all of the people of that time, of that country, that territory. But that has no justification. It has no real merit aside from the fact that my holy doctrine is greater than your holy doctrine.
Yeah.
And that's what Vedic Porta is saying here. My holy doctrine is greater than your Federation law on this station. I cannot be exonerated from that law because I am a Bajoran and I'm following the will of the prophets.
Yeah.
That is more dangerous as a saying than anything that I have seen so far in Star Trek from a religious standpoint.
Yeah.
It baffles me that, I mean, it's not, I actually think it's fantastic that they're tackling it. It just baffles me that it's still being done in the 24th century.
Well, I mean, again, it reveals very acutely this privileged place that faith and religion get, where you can just say, well, that's what the doctrine calls for because that's what the prophet said, therefore we're going with that. And your other rules be damned, because we get to answer to this other power. You know, again, good for Star Trek for taking that on and revealing it and showing it, you know, again, putting it in this alien context where we're you know, very clearly talking about a human condition here, a human problem here, but we're putting it on this alien species for now. Just saying, well, it's their problem. Let's look at how they deal with it. There's another thing here where we're looking at the Dajaras, and Akoram is describing to Kira that if they return to the Dajaras, they will have erased forever the scar of the occupation. That's all that they need to do. And that was a moment that, regardless of the religious implication, you know, of him just sort of using faith as a way to manipulate himself and others into this position, it is advocating what some people do still, which is to have this attitude, well, if we just go back to this old way of thinking, if we just go back to this old way of life, if we just follow this very narrow set of rules, then all the problems will magically go away. And people buy it, which is the worst part of that. And it's unfortunate that it's easier for people to buy when they've hit a crisis point. The interesting thing in this episode is that they haven't hit a crisis point. This is just new and interesting information to them because here's this new person, and in a fascinating way, a voice out of the past who has come to visit them. So, of course, they're giving him some place of prominence anyway. You know, that you're sort of layering on top of that. But the desire to follow that, like if you were to put this in human terms, and if somebody from our history from a couple hundred years ago just showed up and said, well, no, you have to do this. This is the way that it's meant to be. I would have a very hard time following or believing that, simply because a lot of history has changed in 200 years, and a lot of progress has been made in 200 years that don't necessarily fit with what those conditions were a couple of centuries ago.
I know the convention of television and the convention of writing, a 48 to 49 minute episode has certain constraints that it puts on the gravitas of the storytelling. But one of the things that, again, it just kind of troubles me a little bit is how quickly everyone, and especially Kira, is to adopt the philosophies and the new religious order of this new emissary. What happened to the Bajorans during the occupation made Bajor different. Goldacott said that. He said that, if it weren't for the occupation, Bajor would still be this very weak culture mired by kind of like these, the weight of their religious beliefs. And you wouldn't have been able to get out of your own way. But because you were able to reorganize and restructure and get rid of these caste systems, you were able to become a better and stronger Bajor. Now this new emissary is saying, no, we have to go back to these systems and forcing people into classes and castes that they aren't familiar with, that they aren't comfortable with, just because he says so. And that completely disregards what happened to the Bajorans that created this new Bajor. The pain, the hardship, the suffering, the loss, all the experiences that made Bajor what it is now is being completely disregarded just because this one person that just appeared,
right,
says so.
Yeah.
And what drives me crazy about this episode is that everyone is so willing just to do it, just to get on board because.
Yeah. I think it drives us both crazy because we know that is a very human response. And even though we would say, like, oh, we would hope to be better than that, we would hope to follow our intellect and ask good questions and not be lured in by the celebrity aspect of this or the great motivational speaker that he is, we still know that this is a human response. This is how people would react. Anybody who's charismatic, who captures enough followers, who makes, it doesn't even have to be a good case, but a persuasive enough case for their position, people will follow. It just happens that we're showing it as planet-wide in this case. I do want to talk about Sisko here a bit, because there are places in Sisko's journey in this episode that I really identify and agree with, and others that I think are just horrible. In the beginning of the episode, he's very uneasy about being the emissary, which, had this been my show, I think I would have made a bigger deal out of that right from the beginning. And I mean from the beginning of DS9. Like, we've touched on that a little bit, but not a lot, because only little things come up for him to put on his emissary hat, right? Mm-hmm. But imagine this, you have no connection at all to a culture. Then suddenly you're just told that you are a religious leader, even though you keep saying, yeah, look, those things that you worship, they're literally, they're beings. They're right over there. Like, I can literally take you to go meet those beings that you keep worshiping. You can go hang out with them. And people would just rather follow the line that you are an emissary, you are this believer. I mean, look, I was lucky enough to be exposed to a lot of different religious traditions when I was growing up. But imagine you walk into a church or a synagogue or a place of worship that just the tip of the iceberg about, and somebody says, you know what, come in here and give this speech. Even though it may not mean anything to you, it really means something, like, it makes us feel good. So you should do this. I would feel enormously disrespectful by doing that. I would feel like an absolute fraud, and there's no way that I could put myself into that position. And where we end up with Sisko then is, by the end of the episode, he takes back the position because he's essentially cornered into it. Otherwise, he watches Bajoran society completely rip itself apart. And part of me says, okay, well, it's an alien culture. This being Star Trek, they are a stand-in for the human condition, good and bad. Maybe you do just have to stand apart from this one. And if they fail, they fail. Because they're not us. And they are entitled to make their own bad decisions. But where he lands by saying, I'm going to take back that position because I need to basically save you from yourselves, and apparently this is now the attitude of Starfleet as well, I find that to be a bit terrifying as well.
I think in that particular circumstance, and the one thing that I think that we missed an opportunity here for kind of like trying to understand where the Federation is that Sisko is really trying to do what the Federation wants him to do based on this inherited authority that he has over the Bajorans with the Emissary title. He doesn't want, yeah, you're right. He doesn't want to be the Emissary. He doesn't care about being the Emissary. He has made it well known to everybody that he doesn't. But at the same time, though, he says, well, if I'm not going to fail Starfleet by readopting this title, then that's okay by me because I'm serving Starfleet's interests, not Bajor's interests. That was at play here in a way, but doesn't fully commit to Starfleet saying, get that Emissary title back because we want Bajor to sign that contract with the Federation because we need them to defend that area of space because we need that foothold against the Cardassians, the Klingons, and any other people in that part of the Alpha Quadrant.
It's unconscionable. I mean, it's a very colonial type thing. Imagine showing up to a lesser developed nation and you're the one who has firearms. And because you have that, the locals there worship you as a god. And you just say like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'll be that because it serves my interests. Mm-hmm. Now I know that I've joked before on our show the old Ghostbusters line of somebody asks you if you're a god, you say yes. Usually under very different contexts than this. This is an episode where it's treating that seriously, and not only is it treating it seriously, it's pinning it all on Sisko, who is the protagonist. He is the hero of the show, who has been charged with not only keeping things together for the Bajorans, but also protecting this part of space. And yes, we've introduced this much more fearsome antagonist who can walk through the wormhole any day now. So there are all these other complicating factors influencing this. I just can't imagine that anybody at Starfleet says, like, oh, well, they're going to think he's a conduit to God. What am I, a radio, a transmitter for speaking to God? Sure, let him do that. That serves
within my reach.
that serves us. Let him do that.
John, I know that you and I didn't do this particular episode together, but just to give the listeners a little bit of a behind-the-scenes tidbit, we did do The Storyteller together.
Yes.
When I was auditioning for the show.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned about The Storyteller I think is very relevant to this particular episode. Sisko becomes the storyteller. Sisko is charged with making sure that he is pushing away the evil that is being manifested against the Bajorans, whether it is outside influences, whether it's alien cultures, anything that is deviating them from their faith. He is the one that has to refocus their energy, refocus their spirituality to make sure that they move forward. That was the role of the storyteller. That was O'Brien's role against the Dal Rock.
Yeah.
And now it is Sisko's role, and I find it, in a way, very similar, or else I don't think I would have brought this up as a reference. Yeah. But I think that that's where Sisko is right now. He is trying to fight the Dal Rock that is all of these things that are trying to steer the Bajoran people away from where they should be going. And I think that's where he needs to be. Not necessarily wants to be, but needs to be.
Yeah, good point. Anything else you want to cover about the A story here before I just move on to one thing about the B plot?
I think that the one most troubling scene for me was when Kira was walking through looking for a seat to have her breakfast. And all of a sudden, these two people one woman, I think she was with somebody else, a couple, she stood up and said that, oh, please take my seat.
Right.
Because we are the caste Tanari and you are the caste Ihvala. And that's the reason.
Yeah.
Not that we're being kind and you're Major Kira Nerys and you're obviously a very busy woman and you have a lot of responsibilities, so please take our seats so that you can have your lunch and go back to your duties. No. The caste system that the new emissary, the Coram Lan, said that, well, we've returned to the old ways, and now everyone has just flipped that switch and said, hey, you know what? you're an artist and we're something lower, so you get our table because.
Yeah. Yeah.
That really troubled me.
Yeah, well, it should, I think, is the idea. It should trouble you. And at least it troubled Kira and it troubled Sisko. The fact that it didn't trouble every other Bajoran is what's troubling, you know? I do want to give a quick nod here to the B story, because the B story really does get buried here a bit. Keiko and Miles. Whew. Okay, look, I will give the writers credit for doing something thoughtful and clever, which is to show that friends are just as important as family, and even family needs a break. They need a balance with each other and among each other. People need lives outside of immediate families, and having Keiko sort of engineer that lesson was a good choice. It actually gave her something admirable to do here, but still, they've been away for a year, but only actually 2 months since they were physically together. And even though Miles trashed their quarters in that time, and then worst, Keiko waits until arriving on DS9 to break the news to him. He's her husband, not a Facebook post.
Subspace signals be darned. You know, I like the B story, and it's nice that it was able to kind of interject a little bit more levity in this episode. That being said, sometimes B stories and the time that they spend on B stories doesn't really drive the character narrative forward, where they could use that time to really explore certain things in the major A story. But it is nice to see, and I kind of identify with, you know, when the in this case, when the Keiko's away, the O'Brien will play. And I understand that, you know, when your significant other goes away for a trip or whatever, you know, you're gonna ramp that bachelor life up to 11.
Sure.
And it's super fun, but you have to strike a balance there.
Yes.
You know, you can't have it, you know, just go, you know, redline in one way and have so much fun, and then kind of begrudge the fact that you have to go back to normal life, because your normal life wouldn't be great if it weren't for the people that make your life normal.
Yeah.
What does it all mean? And by the way, did we ever find out what God needs with the starship? I'm still wondering about that.
So traditionally on Mission Log, we are at the point where we talk about the morals and meanings and messages if we haven't talked enough about morals and meanings and messages in our discussion. But in this way, we can try and make a certain peace with what we've watched, or at least attempt to. So, John, how do you feel about the morals and meanings and messages of Accession, and how does it land for you in the context of our traditions of Mission Log?
Didn't I just say last week or the week before I loved it, but I hated it, but I loved it? Or some version of that, or I hated it, but I loved it, but I hated it. I've landed there with this episode, but I don't think I hate it because it's poorly made, and I think I love it because they have managed to take on big, deep, challenging topics, really challenging topics, and do them in a dramatic way that fits neatly into, 45 to 48 minutes. But I think part of where we land is just absolutely terrible. There are so many things going on here, and like I said, my brain just sort of melted at many points when watching this, full of outrage, but interest, but outraged again. I'm glad that they covered so much ground here. And actually, for the overall arc of DS9, this episode fits in very nicely with the exploration of Bajoran beliefs. And there are some very Star Trek messages to take away here, which I greatly appreciate. This show is not, like I said, we are rightfully outraged by Akorum's position. We are rightfully outraged by the amount of buy-in that gets from the Bajoran population at large. And to the show's credit, the show is not advocating for those positions. Quite the opposite. It is meant to outrage us that this kind of thing would happen. It lets Kira have a little bit of a challenge in her faith when she starts to realize, like, oh, I'm not cut out for this thing. I decided to go along with it because it sounded good, but I'm actually not cut out for that. That's not who I am. That is the closest thing she gets to having a crisis of faith. But they pulled their punches by, again, not really going deep in that conversation with Odo or somebody else. I think what's most troubling in this episode is just letting Sisko play this role, whether people believe in it or not, because it's convenient. That's what really worries me, because it makes him no better than a manipulative charlatan who could just come along and say, I know what these Bajorans will believe, so I'll just make sure that they believe it, but in a way that benefits me, or benefits whatever position I want them to have. So had I written this, I would have said this is really the chance that Benjamin has to step away from this and sort of put a nail in the idea that he is not a religious figure. Now, look, I know before we start to get outraged emails, we're in the middle of season 4. There is a lot more DS9 to go, and I know there is a lot more of Benjamin Sisko's arc to go, where we land with that. I've watched ahead, okay. I've read ahead. But I think where we have put Sisko here, and particularly in relation to the ideals of Starfleet and the ideals of the Federation, it really has him going in and just sort of, or at least Starfleet being okay with this idea. Well, if pretending to be a religious figure benefits us, yeah, we'll let it happen. Hey, at least it's not the other guy. Now, it's very interesting to me that there was pushback, as I read, from the studio at the time about making this episode, because religion stories don't do well in ratings the way that action stories do. And there is no action here, which kind of makes me like it even more. Just tell the story. It is extremely complicated and touchy because you're getting right at people's identity through faith. And I applaud Star Trek for taking that on, and especially for letting us see that play out on Bajor, where we get to hold them up as a mirror to ourselves. We should be mostly horrified at what's in that mirror. So if Star Trek did that, then great. This episode really works on those levels. I just have a big problem with where it lands with Sisko. What about you?
Well, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I just want to kind of, I wouldn't say that I disagree with where you're at with Sisko, but I just kind of wanted to add a little bit more context to how I saw the end of this episode. And
please, yeah.
I think that as the emissary, he has the opportunity to at least his version of the emissary has the opportunity to grow from his experiences compared to Akarim, who was just wholesale believing in the fact that if the prophets told me to do this, then I'm going to do it because the prophets will it. At least Sisko is skeptical enough to say, you know what? I don't really buy into a lot of what's going on here, but I understand the power that I wield and the authority that I have over these people. But at least I have a reality check in my motivations with getting Bajor to sign into the Federation. I have my advisors with Dax and Kira and O'Brien and Bashir and Worf up to a certain extent. So you have all of these people that are at least grounding him as a person with this power to question certain decisions that he has to make as the emissary versus, say, Akarim. So at least I give him that credit that he's not just saying, I was visited by the prophets and they told me to do this. Therefore, I'm going to espouse that message and you're all supposed to follow it blindly. I'm glad that he is at least questioning the, if not the message, the method of delivering the message.
Yeah.
Or maybe both. And that's the thing that, John, I think you and I really agree on, is that it's not so much that there is something that people believe in. It's the blind trust that people go into certain faith-based policies where they don't question it no matter their level of intelligence. They don't question why. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this, and who am I doing it for? Who does it benefit? And how is it going to change my life? How is it going to change my worldviews? Is it going to make me a better person, a kinder person, a crueler person, based on just because the faith says so?
Yeah.
And I think that at least Sisko questions that.
I think so too, and actually I'm glad that you brought those up, because that plays into what I think the takeaway messages are here, which are mostly positive, which is that, number one, abiding by a principle or a law just because it's handed down and just because it's based on faith, and I put that in big quotation marks, is a terrible idea. Remember, Akorum wasn't told anything by the prophets, the wormhole aliens. He wasn't told anything about the Dajaras or anything else that had to do with their vision for the Bajoran people, because they don't talk like that anyway. He just assumed that that's what it was, and then he applied his experience with the wormhole aliens to say that that's what it was. But they told him no such thing. I like what Sisko did at first, which to me was the sort of the lesson of go find the answer. I said earlier in the last segment, what I'm interested in is what's true. You can say that you can believe something. I can talk to 10 different people who all say that they believe 10 different things. Fine. At the end of the day, I just want to know what's true. Sisko actually tries to do that because he can spell it out. He can say, look, there are the people over there that you say have the power to decide who's the emissary, who speaks for you, who can tell the Bajoran people what they should and should not do. We can actually go get the answer. And I think that there are a lot of people of faith, at least as portrayed here, who choose not to do that. We had that way back with Kaiopaka, saying that, she didn't want to meet the prophets, because you just shouldn't do that as a believer. And I respect Sisko's pragmatism in that respect. But also, I would say in this episode, don't do what Sisko does, which is just to take on the role of this religious figure when that's not who you are. Again, I would liken it to myself. Just, it's convenient and comforting for somebody else if you say these words or if you take this title. I think it's disingenuous and wrong to take that on if you're not actually a part of that. I know that there are big things at stake when it comes to Starfleet's relationship to Bajor, and certainly Starfleet's position in the quadrant being right next to the wormhole. But there's got to be something in the Starfleet charter that says, do not pretend like you're a religious leader for whatever civilization you encounter.
Yeah, that's the really big question here that, again, this episode doesn't really fully commit to, and that's okay. I mean, again, I know the conveniences and the contrivances of writing a script and trying to get a point across, or several, in the time constraints that we have. But one of the things that just really struck me so profoundly at a personal level is when Vedic Porta said to Kira that you're still clinging to a false life. Clinging to a false life.
Yeah.
He said that you must do what the emissary has asked and followed your Dajara with all your heart, because if you give yourself over to the prophets, they will guide you along the path they've chosen for you. Because right now you're living a false life. Imagine the magnitude of those words. And he doesn't even know what Kira has done in the name of Bajor, what she's sacrificed,
Right.
And I just found that so powerful, because as a person who was raised as a Catholic, I was born Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, and this is months after I was born. Mm-hmm. I went to Catholic school because that's what my parents told me to do. I went to church because that's what my parents told me to do, or my relatives told me to do. I went to all the holy days because if you're Catholic, you have to go to Christmas, you have to go to Easter, you have to go to the Feast of the Ascension, you have to say the Rosary, you have to do all of these things. But nobody asked me.
Right.
Right? And it's not that I would reject the fact or not even entertain the fact that I would want to become Catholic. It's just that because you're indoctrinated at such an early age, you don't know any better but to follow the indoctrination. Because if you don't, you're outcast, not with just your family, but your friends, your society. You know, if you live in a small town, oh boy, watch out, because those whispers, they'll get back to your family.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I never had that choice. I have to be part of that faith. And that's what they're saying here. You don't have a choice. You have to either toe the line or suffer the guilt and consequences of what your will of the prophets will do to you. And I think that's something that is so hard to wrestle with when it comes to trying to intelligently challenge the faith-based system upon which you have been obliged to participate in. And that is where I land with this episode, because just to leave this one question with all of the listeners, whether you are based in faith or not, one of the greatest gifts that has been granted to us by, in my case, the Christian God, is the aspect of free will. The will to choose how I even accept to participate in that faith. Because if I do or do not, I will be forgiven either way. At least that's what I have been told to believe.
And with that, Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment, executive producer Rod Roddenberry. Mission Log is part of the Roddenberry Podcast Network. Visit us at podcast.roddenberry.com and enjoy the entire family of podcast entertainment, including Women at Warp, Priority One, The Trek Files, Your Daily Star Trek News, and Shabam.
Shabam!
If you'd like to support Mission Log directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog. And for more exciting Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Rules of Engagement.
There's a simple way to judge Major Kira's artistic ability. Bring Alexander to the station. They each have to make a mug for Worf. That's it. That's the whole idea. I'm not sure there's really a winner. End transmission.
Podcast.roddenberry.com, the Roddenberry Podcast Network.